Emily Shaw had always known she was different from the other pilots at Jefferson Air Force Base, but she hadn't expected it to matter this much. Growing up in the wheat fields of eastern Colorado, she'd learned to fly crop dusters before she could legally drive, her hands growing calloused from fixing engines at her father's small airfield, Shaw Aviation Services. While other kids played video games, she was rebuilding carburetors and memorizing flight patterns. The morning she arrived at Jefferson with nothing but a worn duffel bag and her father's old helmet, the whispers started immediately. "She looks like she belongs in a garage, not a cockpit," she overheard one cadet say. Her flight jacket bore no sponsor logos or unit patches, just a standard-issue name tag and the silver wind gauge necklace that had belonged to her father. But Emily didn't mind the stares. She had work to do. Within her first month, she'd outpaced most cadets in flight simulation scores, mastering the F-22's complex systems with an intuitive understanding that surprised even the instructors. Her hands moved across the controls like she'd been born knowing them. When other pilots struggled with the aircraft's sensitive throttle response, Emily fine-tuned her approach until the jet responded to the slightest touch. Still, something felt wrong. During group briefings, Colonel Marcus Whitaker barely acknowledged her presence. When he did look her way, his expression suggested he was seeing a problem rather than a solution. The other officers followed his lead, creating an invisible wall around her that grew higher each day. Emily's simulator logs told a different story than her treatment suggested. She'd completed 12 critical emergency maneuvers in half the time of anyone else in her class, but somehow her scores were marked with vague annotations, unconfirmed variables, unexpected maneuvering, incomplete context. The praise never came, even when she deserved it. Late at night, when the base grew quiet, Emily would return to her bunk and sketch detailed throttle maps, annotating hand-drawn diagrams of F-22 flight profiles. She'd spent 3 months personally calibrating one particular jet, adjusting its systems until it responded perfectly to subtle corrections at low altitude. The aircraft had become an extension of her instincts. She should have known they'd find a way to take it from her. The dismissal. The envelope arrived without ceremony, just a folded piece of paper hand-delivered by a nervous junior officer who couldn't meet her eyes. Emily stood in the center of Hangar 7's operations bay, morning sunlight glinting off the polished concrete floor. She didn't need to open it to know what it said. The weight in her palm and the officer's guilty expression told her everything. "Your participation in today's demonstration flight has been withdrawn by administrative directive," he recited, his words flat and rehearsed. "You are required to vacate assigned duties, effective immediately." Then, too quickly, as if the words burned his tongue, "It's not disciplinary, it's just optics." Across the hangar, Lieutenant Jake Rains adjusted the collar of his perfectly pressed flight suit, while 2 media personnel hovered nearby, snapping photos for tomorrow's press releases. He flashed them a practiced smile, the kind that looked good in recruitment brochures. One of the senior instructors clapped him on the shoulder, saying something about making the program proud. Emily walked to the flight assignment board, where her name had already vanished from the mission roster. The entire schedule showed revised personnel, approved. No alerts, no announcements. It was as if the new arrangement had always been the only arrangement. "Colonel Whitaker," Emily said, approaching him as he reviewed the day's agenda on his tablet. "May I ask why I've been removed from today's demonstration?" He didn't look up. "The decision came from command, Shaw. Lieutenant Rains has the profile they're looking for. Sir, I've logged over 40 hours in that specific aircraft. I calibrated the throttle sensitivity systems myself." Finally, he looked at her, his expression hardening like concrete setting. This isn't about technical qualifications, Shaw. Today's demonstration has significant media coverage. The program needs to present its best face to potential recruits.
And funding committees. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. And I'm not it, Emily stated, her voice steady.
Your contributions have been noted, he replied dismissively, already turning back to his tablet. But today, we need someone who represents the modern Air Force, someone who fits the image we're cultivating for the next generation. Emily didn't
argue. As she turned to leave, she caught a cadet whispering to his friend, "Guess she's going back to fixing coffee machines where she belongs." The comment didn't sting the way they intended. It was just another weight added to the growing
pile she carried, but something about this felt different. This felt personal. The hidden truth. By mid-morning, Jefferson Air Force Base hummed with anticipation. Media crews had positioned their equipment along the runway, and broadcast drones circled overhead like mechanical vultures. Emily had retreated to the auxiliary hangar, sitting on an empty maintenance bench with her helmet resting in her lap, watching her own face appear briefly on the internal monitors before being replaced by Rain's polished headshot. Sure, the voice belonged to Tech Sergeant Jessica Martinez, one of the few people who had ever acknowledged Emily's technical skills. Jessica stood in the doorway, her expression guarded but concerned. "I heard what happened," Jessica said, sitting beside her. "It's not right." Emily nodded once, saying nothing. Words felt pointless now. "The calibrations you did on that F-22, Rains hasn't even logged half the simulator hours you have on that bird. He's flying on your settings." Emily looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Jessica pulled out her tablet, fingers moving quickly across the screen. "I checked the maintenance logs this morning. They copied your entire profile, throttle response."
Settings, sensor dampening, control lag compensation, everything. They're using your work, but putting his name on it.
The betrayal hit Emily like a physical blow. Being replaced was one thing. Having her work stolen was another entirely. "There's more," Jessica continued quietly. "I talked to some people. They're spreading rumors that you couldn't handle the pressure. The command had concerns about your performance under media scrutiny." Later that day, Emily discovered a photo of herself on an internal forum, a candid shot of her walking away from the hangar with her helmet in hand, looking defeated. The caption read, "Program Standards in Action." The comments below were worse than the image itself. Lieutenant David Chen, another pilot who had occasionally shown her respect, found her staring at the screen in the computer lab. "This isn't about skill, Shaw," he said, his voice low and angry. "It's about who photographs."
"Well, for the recruitment posters."
"Who brings in the defense contracts?" Emily closed the browser window. "My father used to say the sky doesn't care who funds your wings, only whether your hands know how to use them." She paused, feeling something cold settle in her chest. "I thought that was enough." David leaned against the desk. "The program cares more about appearances than ability these days. But people like me and Jessica, we know the difference. We see what you can do." It wasn't much, but it was the first real support Emily had felt since arriving at Jefferson, and it planted the seed of an idea that would soon grow into something much larger. The evidence. That night, Emily sat in her barracks room, packing her belongings with methodical precision. The unopened dismissal envelope remained on her desk, like an accusation. Through her window, she could hear the final preparations for tomorrow's demonstration. Engines being tested, maintenance crews calling out system checks. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Jessica and David stood in the hallway, both looking grim. "We found something," Jessica said without preamble, stepping inside and setting her tablet on the desk. Her fingers moved quickly, pulling up a calibration profile buried deep in the system files. In the corner, nearly hidden beneath layers of default coding, a signature tag read Sparrow ESV3.9. "This is the exact flight profile being used for tomorrow's demo," Jessica explained, pointing to strings of code and performance parameters. "Every single adjustment was copied directly from your personal configurations." Emily stared at the screen. Her work had been buried in a forgotten system folder, then quietly reactivated under a generic ID that most people wouldn't recognize. It hadn't been deleted, it had been stolen and hidden.
"I thought they'd completely rewritten the flight systems," Jessica continued. "But someone uploaded your entire sequence 3 weeks ago. It's the only profile the aircraft didn't reject during diagnostic testing." David handed her a small data
drive. "These are your complete simulator logs, every emergency scenario you mastered, every innovation you developed. Most of them were marked unverified because you completed them during solo practice sessions, but the timestamps prove everything. Your techniques match the exact maneuvers Rains has been practicing." Emily took the drive, feeling its slight weight in her palm. "They're not just replacing me," she said slowly, understanding dawning. "They're erasing me while using everything I created." "Command knew about your profile," David confirmed. "They chose not to use your name because they thought it would complicate the public narrative." Emily's jaw tightened. She'd been prepared to accept being overlooked, even dismissed. "But this was theft, plain and simple. There's something else," Jessica said, her voice dropping. "The auxiliary hangar has a backup F-22, an unmarked test aircraft they use for emergency calibrations. It's not even on tomorrow's logistics roster." Emily looked at her friends, seeing her own resolve reflected in their faces. An idea was forming, dangerous but necessary. "If something goes wrong tomorrow," David said quietly, "we're going to need someone who knows that jet better than the pilot flying it." Emily spent the rest of the night in the auxiliary hangar, not packing, but preparing. The plan. Emily spent the pre-dawn hours in the auxiliary hangar, memorizing every detail of the reserve F-22 that sat forgotten in the corner. Unlike the polished aircraft prepared for the demonstration, this one bore no special markings, no media-friendly paint job. It was a ghost in the system, used only for emergency calibrations and test runs that never appeared in official reports. Working by the light of a single maintenance lamp, she methodically reviewed the aircraft specifications, fuel capacity, engine response ratios, control, sensitivity variations. Most importantly, she uploaded her own flight profile to its systems under a call sign no one would think to monitor. Sparrow. On a nearby workbench, she laid out her flight suit and helmet with military precision. For 3 years, she had followed every rule, accepted every slight, and continued to excel despite being systematically overlooked. Today, the rules would have to bend. The morning of the demonstration arrived with perfect visibility, clear blue skies and minimal wind. In the VIP viewing pavilion, dignitaries filled their assigned seats: generals, defense contractors, media representatives, and 2 senators who controlled military funding. The base's largest display screen showed Lieutenant Rains climbing into the cockpit with practiced confidence. He looked like every recruitment poster the Air Force had ever produced, moving with choreographed precision, offering a crisp salute to the cameras before sliding the canopy shut. Everything about the moment was designed for maximum visual impact. Raptor 1 is online and showing green across all systems. His voice crackled through the speakers. "Ready for departure." "Cleared for takeoff, Raptor 1," the tower responded. The F-22 surged down the runway and climbed into the morning sky with a roar that rattled the viewing stands. For the first several minutes, Everything proceeded flawlessly. High G turns, precision rolls, low-altitude passes that showcased the aircraft's capabilities. The crowd watched in appreciative silence. In the auxiliary hangar, Emily sat in the reserve F-22's cockpit, running pre-flight checks without activating any systems that would alert the tower. Jessica monitored communications from a maintenance terminal, while David tracked the demonstration's progress from the observation deck. "Something's wrong," Jessica said suddenly, her voice cutting through the hangar's quiet. "Rains is reporting a problem." Emily's hands moved instinctively to the ignition controls. "What kind of problem?" "Bird strike on the left engine. He's showing pressure loss and hydraulic failure." David's voice came through their secure radio channel. "Control tower is scrambling emergency response. Flight telemetry shows him descending fast, and he's heading straight for the base perimeter." Emily secured her helmet and began the startup sequence. Beyond the base perimeter lay the auxiliary power station and fuel storage facility. A crash there would be catastrophic. "Is he ejecting?" she asked. "Confirmed," Jessica replied, monitoring multiple channels simultaneously. "But the aircraft is still going down, not gliding, but falling. Impact trajectory puts it directly over the fuel depot." Emily's aircraft hummed to life beneath her hands, responding to her touch like it had been waiting for this moment. She looked at Jessica, who nodded grimly and moved to the hangar door controls. "Open the blast doors," Emily said quietly. For the first time in 3 years, Emily Shaw was about to fly on her own terms. The rescued sortie, the crowd in the viewing pavilion, fell into stunned silence as they watched Lieutenant Rains eject from the failing F-22. The camera drones tracked his parachute descent, while the empty aircraft continued its deadly spiral toward the base perimeter, trailing smoke and losing
altitude rapidly.
"Do we have remote override capability?" a tower controller shouted. "Negative. All flight systems are non-responsive." Then, cutting through the chaos of radio chatter, came a voice that no one in the tower recognized. "Sparrow F-22 is airborne and engaging." On every screen across the base, a second aircraft appeared, rising from the auxiliary runway like a ghost materializing from thin air. It climbed with impossible precision, intercepting the failing jet's descent path and matching its speed with mechanical perfection. "Identify that pilot immediately," Colonel Whitaker demanded, striding into the control tower. "Unknown operator, sir. Call sign Sparrow." No flight plan on file. Emily positioned her aircraft directly behind the plummeting F-22, matching every erratic movement as it spun through the sky. Her controls weren't synchronized with the failing jet. She was flying blind, adjusting purely by instinct and intimate knowledge of how these aircraft behaved under stress. She eased forward until her jet's nose cone aligned beneath the tail section of the falling aircraft, then made micro-adjustments to thrust, angle, and distance. What she was attempting had never been tried with F-22s. It was a technique her father had taught her using crop dusters, a desperate maneuver he'd called a ghost catch. The physics were brutal, one aircraft trying to stabilize another through carefully applied aerodynamic pressure using controlled thrust wash to influence the failing jet's trajectory. Too much force would tear both aircraft apart. Too little would accomplish nothing. "Who is that pilot?" a reporter asked, staring at the impossible scene unfolding above them. Emily held the formation for 37 seconds, long enough for the wind shear to shift, for the rate of descent to decrease. The spinning motion gradually slowed as her aircraft's controlled airflow created a pocket of stability around the damaged jet. Then she pulled away slightly, allowing the F-22 to level out while maintaining her position. The crowd watched in absolute silence as both aircraft descended together, the damaged one no longer falling but gliding, guided by the precise movements of its unlikely escort. As they approached the runway, Emily activated a frequency she had programmed during countless simulator sessions, her own buried code that still existed in the base's emergency systems. Using her aircraft's computers, she established a data link with the failing jet and began automated deceleration protocols. Both F-22s touched down within seconds of each other, the first aircraft crooked but intact, the second landing with textbook precision. Emergency vehicles raced across the tarmac as both engines powered down to silence. In the control tower, a communications officer stared at his instruments in disbelief. "Flight recorder shows perfect formation flying for the entire rescue sequence," he reported. "Zero margin for error." Colonel Whitaker watched through the tower windows as a lone figure climbed out of the second aircraft. Even from this distance, he could see the measured, unhurried movements of someone who had just accomplished the impossible and knew it. The pilot removed her helmet, and for the first time in 3 years, Emily Shaw had everyone's complete attention. The reckoning. The tarmac fell silent except for the cooling engines and distant emergency sirens. Emily climbed down from her aircraft with the same calm precision she had flown with, no dramatic gestures, no acknowledgement of the cameras that had swiveled to track her every movement. She disconnected her helmet and tucked it under her arm, walking across the hot asphalt with steady, measured steps. Colonel Whitaker approached without his usual entourage, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the crowd of dignitaries and media personnel watched in stunned silence. The demonstration that was supposed to showcase Lieutenant Rains had become something entirely different. "Pilot Shaw," he said, stopping a few feet away. His voice carried across the tarmac with military clarity. "Thank you for preventing what could have been a catastrophic accident." Emily said nothing, her face composed and distant. The colonel turned toward the nearest camera drone, squaring his shoulders. "This morning, Lieutenant Rains was scheduled to demonstrate our advanced tactical capabilities in the F-22 Raptor. When his aircraft suffered a critical systems failure, it was Emily Shaw, operating without authorization, who executed a mid-air stabilization maneuver that has never been successfully performed in the history of this program." Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. The camera feed adjusted, focusing on Emily's name stitched into her flight suit, her call sign still blinking on the readout screens. "Sparrow." "Furthermore," the colonel continued, his voice growing stronger, "the flight profile that made this morning's demonstration possible was originally developed by Cadet Shaw. Her configuration protocols, her system optimizations, her code." He turned back to her. "That was your work they were using, wasn't it?" Emily gave the slightest nod. A media coordinator stepped forward nervously. "Ms. Shaw, would you care to comment on what just happened here?" Emily reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew the dismissal envelope from the previous day, still sealed, still creased from hasty printing. Without a word, she handed it to Colonel Whitaker. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was unmistakable. He accepted the envelope, understanding immediately. Around them, a line of cadets had begun to form, not in any official formation, but simply standing in solidarity. Some looked down at their boots, others watched Emily with obvious respect. She turned from the colonel and began walking toward the hangar, her footsteps echoing across the concrete. Camera shutters clicked rapidly as photographers captured the moment. Emily Shaw, walking past the aircraft she had saved, past the commanders who had dismissed her, carrying nothing but her helmet and the quiet dignity of someone who had just proved her worth beyond any doubt. The crowd remained silent. No cheers, no applause, but no one tried to stop her either. She didn't need to stay for debriefing or official statements. The entire base had watched her fly. The footage was already broadcasting live across military networks and news channels. Her actions had spoken louder than any words could. As she reached the hangar entrance, Emily paused and looked back once at the aircraft still cooling on the tarmac. Then she disappeared inside, leaving behind a crowd that was finally beginning to understand what they had almost lost: legacy. The footage went everywhere within hours. Emily Shaw's name dominated military aviation forums, news networks, and social media feeds. Analysts dissected the rescue frame by frame, experts debated the physics of her maneuver, and aviation circles argued about how she had managed to accomplish the impossible. But Emily gave no interviews. She declined every request for statements or appearances, refusing to capitalize on her moment of vindication. She had said everything she needed to say in the sky above Jefferson Air Force Base. Within the academy, however, everything had changed. Colonel Whitaker convened an emergency review board the following Monday, announcing a complete overhaul of the flight training program. The new emergency protocols included a section titled Advanced Tandem Stabilization Techniques. In smaller text beneath the heading, someone had quietly added, "The Sparrow Method." Jessica Martinez personally installed the updated simulator software, which included a new default configuration based on flight profiles marked ES Sparrow. When junior officers asked about the designation, they were told simply that it represented tested emergency standards. No one changed the settings. No one questioned their effectiveness. Weeks later, a small plaque appeared on the wall near the simulator bay entrance. It was black, unpolished, and read, "Flight Systems Development, E. Shaw." Beneath it hung a simple badge on a lanyard, no rank insignia, no photograph, just a name. David Chen never mentioned who had authorized it, but cadets noticed it was always kept meticulously clean. Emily returned to the base exactly once, 3 months later. It was early morning, the hangar lights still dim, when a new class of cadets gathered for their first advanced simulation training. She entered without announcement, walking the length of the bay while everyone stood in respectful silence. Above the primary simulator, a screen played archived footage from that day, her aircraft approaching the failing F-22, holding formation, guiding it safely to ground. The video ran without commentary or music, just the sound of wind and radio chatter. It had become part of the standard training curriculum, played each morning to remind pilots what was possible when skill met determination. Emily watched the footage for a moment, then walked to the back of the room where the new plaque hung. One cadet noticed her hands, the same steady hands from the video, now folded calmly at her sides. Another cadet started to speak, but thought better of it. The silence felt appropriate. She left before the official training session began, walking out into the morning air, where the reserve F-22 sat in its usual spot, still unmarked, still ready. She didn't approach the aircraft or linger on the tarmac. She simply looked once, nodded to herself, and walked away. Inside the simulator bay, the screen continued its loop, the falling jet, the rescue approach, the perfect formation, the safe landing. Emily Shaw had never been the loudest voice in any room, never the one seeking spotlight or glory. But she had left something more valuable than recognition, proof that excellence cannot be dismissed, that true skill will always rise when it matters most. The cadets watching that morning would remember her, not for what she said, but for what she did when everyone else had given up. In a world obsessed with image and politics, she had reminded them that competence speaks for itself, and that sometimes the people who are overlooked are exactly the ones you need when everything falls apart. Her story became legend not because she sought fame, but because she had the courage to act when action was needed most. And in the end, that quiet courage changed everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.